After more than 100 years, it's back to the woods for a logging wagon.
About, I think it was about 18 months ago, Storm Doris blew through and a number of trees were blown down, and Tony here rang us to say could we help him removing the trees which had fallen into his back garden. We asked Tony if we could have a look at some of the treasure in his garden, and first thing I spotted was some huge iron rims, and I asked Tony what they were, and he said it was from a large logging cart that he had found, that he thinks came from Warwick Estates some 40 years ago, and it's been sitting here for the best part of 40 years. So on closer inspection it was thought, why don't we restore it? It would be a nice idea to park it in the woods. And we left it at that for 6 months, and then 6 months later someone said, are we going to restore that cart? And I said, well, if you can build a cartwheel, we can restore the cart. And that's how we got involved. And about a year ago we came in and we extracted the rear end of the cart, and over the past year we've been restoring that. We've built the first wheel, we've yet to fit the tyre, and now we're here a year later to extract the front end of the cart, which, as you can see here, is we've started dismantling. We've had to remove a tree to get it to dismantle it, and we've now taken it into two pieces and we're about to extract it.
With the front end of the wagon that supports the fifth wheel being in two parts, it was decided to bring out the top section first, as it was lighter and smaller, and this was hauled onto the cart. To more easily move the heavier and more bulkier underpart, it stayed on its slider and it was dragged carefully through the woods. In keeping it steady and secure, it proved in the end to provide a little fun. Much of the old wood could be saved, and once in the workshop, the restoration work began. Braces were needed, so wanting to make curvy shapes, you looked for a fallen curvy tree. And finding a suitable ash tree, it was cut, transported, and then shaped to make the two braces. And that helped to make up the connection between the front and the back underframe. The square shaft holder needed to be fixed between the curved braces, which provided the housing for the shaft, so the length of the wagon can be adjusted. Whitmore Timber helped in providing much of the wood needed, along with the expertise to deal with the heavy cutting and shaping of the various parts, and in particular the 6 felloes that made up the rims of the 4 wheels. For each wheel, a large oak beam was cut into 6 sections, then went through the many shaping operations to make the fellies. The ends were cut to 60 degrees so the 6 identical pieces could be put together into a hexagonal rim for the giant bandsaw to round the fellies eventually.
Well, this is one of our last visits to Whitmore's Timber. We've been visiting on and off over the last 2¼ years. Of course, Whitmore's are our main sponsor, having provided all the timber for the restoration work on the timber wagon. Today we've spent a good few hours cutting the felly material, which has to be at 60 degrees to perform the circle, and Richard here has been the main man making sure that we've achieved that. Chris has been supporting us throughout on the sales side of the business, and all I can do is thank them very much as representing the project. Thanks Chris, and thank you Richard.
The gang at the workshop worked on the different restoration work, like cleaning up the axle. There were 4 main tasks in the construction of the 4 wheels. The centre of the hubs were hollowed out on a lathe for the iron sleeve that will hold the axle. This was then offered up to check it fits, with careful hands crafting a slot to ensure the sleeve lug that stops any rotation fits snugly into the hub. Finishing the hub holes ready for the spokes to be mortised into the hub and checking they fit before all the spokes were added, and due to the tight fit some help was needed. The spokes were also crafted from oak, with the foot fitting into the hub and the rounded tongue being fitted into the rim, and once in place each was numbered to its own fellows. It needed very accurate measurements to be made to ensure the parts all fit together without issue. The tight fit is needed so the holes are drilled very carefully and accurately, otherwise the spokes would vibrate under the heavy workload and eventually the wheel would break apart. Each of the 6 fellows needed to be attached to 2 of the spokes to complete the wheel. Each fitting will have the spokes squeezed together to line up with their unique radius rim holes, and each is securely fitted. The smaller gaps between the fellows and the tighter the fit and the longer the wheel will last. As each fellow is added, so it builds into a complete wheel. No glue or any nails are needed to strengthen it, and when the last piece is added, then the wooden ties are added to bring stability to its construction, to make a near perfect circle, ensuring the wheel is ready for the original, now cleaned iron band to be attached. The fire had to be built to ensure the wide 3/4 inch iron tyre is heated, so it would expand uniformly. The wheel is laid flat with retainers to allow for the tyre to be dropped on accurately and evenly. The heat is intensified to around 600 degrees to make the iron band expand so it can be fitted around the wooden wheel, so when it is cooled the iron will shrink back to its original size, enclosing the wheel very tightly. After being heated for some time, the fire is scraped away to allow the tyre edge to be held at a safe distance by the specially made grippers. The iron tyre is then lowered onto the holding retainers, fixed to the high part of the rim, and once the retainers are removed, the tyre will fall to fit snugly onto the wooden wheel. After a quick cooling, the tyre shrinks back to its normal size, so it holds the wooden rim securely to provide the wheel with a far greater working life. Once cooled, it's taken away to be stained and await the fitting to the waggon. When the old chassis was disassembled, it was found much of the timber was salvageable, along with bolts and other metal parts. However, new sections were needed to be crafted, so the old parts fitted to them. Logging wagons are part of our heritage, and the craftsmanship needed to build them has mostly been lost, so part of the project was to relearn just how such work was undertaken. To connect the two parts of the wagon, the sliding shaft was attached, which allows the wagon to be elongated or shortened depending on what type of logs were to be loaded. With the back end of the wagon now completed, it's time to fit it all together with its front end frame. First, the underframe of the front end needed to slide under the shaft which supports the lower end in what is known as the fifth wheel, and testing it is lined up correctly with the kingpin. This is followed by setting the matching top element of the fifth wheel, which allows the front end of the wagon to be turned in line with the horse's pulling action. Finally, the kingpin is put in place, locking it all together.
A technical.
The axle is finally attached to the frame, with the bolts being tightened up. The wheel is manhandled onto the axle, then firmly attached, followed by testing just how straight it spins. Last minute checking was carried out before the wagon was shown the daylight again. Out of the workshop, looking like a working logging wagon, for maybe the first time in 100 years. It was set onto Brandon Green, allowing the locals to see the fine workmanship in bringing this piece of history back to life. Without 4 horses in a single file formation to pull it, the wagon was taken at its normal walking pace, journeying back to the woods, with the brakeman behind just in case of an upward climb where the horsepower needed a rest. Oh, and please don't call it a cart, as wagons have 4 wheels and cart only 2. Waiting to be loaded with some logs, it came to its final resting place where people can now visit Brandon Woods and see this logging wagon, a practical piece of history, now in its own environment back in the woods.